Ice cream used to be the safest, simplest joy of childhood, something you could grab from the freezer without reading a label or worrying about hidden dangers. But those days are long gone. Behind the smiling mascots, farm-fresh imagery, and nostalgic branding, some of America's biggest ice cream companies have quietly slipped into dangerous territory. We're talking bacteria you can't see, allergens that aren't labeled, and ingredient swaps the companies hope you never notice. Today, we're exposing the 5 ice cream brands you should never buy, and the 5 that are still worth trusting because your freezer shouldn't be a battleground. First, brand number 1. Bluebell. Ice cream has always carried this comforting illusion of purity, cold, sweet, uncomplicated. But behind that innocent reputation is a darker reality most shoppers never consider. Contamination isn't a tea loud, it isn't visible, and it rarely comes with a warning label. Listeria doesn't change the smell or the taste of your ice cream. Allergen residue doesn't leave a neon sign inside the carton. And mislabeling isn't caught by crowds of inspectors. It slips quietly through production lines, past overworked quality control teams, and straight into your freezer. In recent years, recall notices have revealed a pattern that's deeply unsettling. Brands Americans trusted for generations were suddenly pulling thousands of cartons off shelves, not because of minor manufacturing hiccups, but because of life-threatening errors. Bacteria capable of killing vulnerable consumers' nuts, packaged into nut-free products and desserts contaminated by production lines that weren't properly cleaned. And the most alarming part? Most of these recalls were silent, tucked into obscure sections of FDA databases where almost no one would ever see them. No bold headlines, no national alerts, just a quiet admission buried under corporate language like voluntary recall or out of an abundance of caution. But these aren't harmless mistakes. When a brand allows allergen contamination, the consequences can be immediate and catastrophic. For families managing severe allergies, one mislabeled spoonful can trigger anaphylaxis before anyone even realizes what went wrong. When a company fails to maintain safe manufacturing conditions, listeria can grow undetected and end up in products served to children, seniors, or people with weakened immune systems. What looks like a pint of ice cream is, in reality, a potential medical emergency disguised as dessert. Consumers assume that if something reaches a supermarket shelf, it must have passed strict safety checks. But the truth is unsettling. Some brands rely on outdated equipment, rushed production schedules, and cost-cutting measures that compromise safety long before that pint lands in your cart. Ice cream is supposed to be comfort food, not a gamble. And yet, the deeper you look into the industry, the more you realize how fragile that comfort really is. If a simple dessert can hide dangers this serious, imagine what happens when a company already infamous for past failures refuses to truly change. That brings us to the first brand on the never buy list, one whose mistakes became national headlines for all the wrong reasons. Worst brand number 2. Friendly's Bluebell wants you to believe they've turned the page, to think that the darkest chapter in their history ended the moment they reopened their factories and rolled out glossy commercials about renewed commitment and doing things the right way. But when a company's past failures involve a deadly listeria outbreak, words alone aren't enough. In 2015, Bluebell didn't just experience a minor contamination issue. They suffered a catastrophic breakdown in safety that killed multiple people, shut down their operations, and forced them into one of the most expensive product recalls in ice cream history. It was supposed to be their wake-up call. Yet nearly a decade later, Bluebell's actions suggest they were never truly shaken awake. Instead of a humbled company obsessed with safety, we see a brand repeating old patterns under a fresh coat of PR polish. Just weeks ago, they quietly initiated another recall, this time for allergen mislabeling. Containers of ice cream containing nuts were sold with 0 warnings on the label. No bold notice, no major press release. Just a low-key announcement slipped online and left for consumers to somehow discover on their own. For families dealing with severe allergies, this isn't a small oversight. It's negligence that can end lives. One spoonful of mislabeled ice cream is all it takes to trigger anaphylactic shock, and Bluebell's reaction. A sanitized corporate statement, as if the incident were a minor inconvenience rather than a potentially fatal mistake. What makes this situation even more infuriating is how successfully Bluebell leans on their wholesome Southern tradition image. Their branding screams nostalgia, warm family values, simple ingredients, old-fashioned care, but their track record tells a different story. One of outdated equipment, inconsistent oversight, and a troubling willingness to gamble with public safety. Despite everything, Bluebell products still show up in schools, nursing homes, hospitals, the exact environments where their previous contamination caused the most harm. Institutions seem to have forgotten the lessons of 2015. Bluebell hasn't earned redemption, they've merely benefited from short public memory. When a company repeatedly proves it can each be trusted with the basics, like proper labeling and contamination prevention, they don't deserve a second chance in your freezer. And unfortunately, Bluebell isn't the only brand hiding dangerous mistakes behind friendly packaging. Worst brand for 3. Rich's Friendlies has built an entire identity around nostalgia. Bright colors, diner-style comfort, family-friendly pricing, and the comforting illusion that their ice cream is as harmless as the memories attached to it. But behind that inviting image is a pattern of mistakes that reveals something far more troubling. A company struggling with the most basic responsibilities of food safety. Their most recent failure wasn't dramatic enough to make national headlines, but it was dangerous enough to put countless families at risk. Friendly-S cookies and cream ice cream ended up packaged inside containers labeled vanilla bean. A switch that sounds harmless until you realize the vanilla containers did not list soy or wheat on the label. Those are 2 of the most common allergens in the United States, and they were completely missing from the ingredient disclosure. This wasn't a tiny typo or a mislabeled sticker. It was a full-blown production and packaging breakdown that somehow slipped through multiple checkpoints and still made it onto store shelves. For families managing allergies, mistakes like this aren't minor. They're terrifying. A parent reading a label should be able to trust that what they see is accurate. When a brand like Friendlies makes such a fundamental error, that trust collapses instantly. One wrong scoop and a simple dessert becomes an emergency room visit. Or worse. What makes Friendly's situation even more frustrating is how quietly they navigate these incidents. Their recalls rarely attract attention because the company has perfected the art of minimizing liability through carefully crafted language. Everything becomes voluntary, limited, or out of an abundance of caution, even when the underlying issue exposes deeper systemic failures. And because Friendly's products are distributed through UNFI, one of the largest food distributors in America, a labeling mistake at one facility doesn't just affect a handful of stores. It spreads across hundreds of retailers before anyone realizes there is a problem. This is the kind of quiet danger that never trends on social media but reaches millions of homes. A brand can call itself friendly. But when it repeatedly fails at something as simple as accurate labeling, the relationship starts to feel one-sided. You trust them with your family's safety. They trust you not to notice their mistakes. Friendly's isn't malicious, but their negligence speaks volumes. And in the world of food safety, negligence is all it takes to cause irreversible harm. Worst brand number 4. Breyers Rich's isn't a household name, and that's exactly how they like it. Unlike the brands you see in grocery store freezers, Rich's operates almost entirely in the shadows of the food service industry. Their ice cream cups aren't purchased by families. They're purchased by institutions, school districts, hospitals, nursing homes, correctional facilities, and government programs. That invisibility makes them far more dangerous than a brand competing for space on a retail shelf, because the people consuming their products rarely know what they're eating or who made it. Recently, Rich AS triggered one of the largest institutional ice cream recalls. In years after a listeria contamination scare forced them to pull more than 100,000 individual servings from facilities across multiple states. These weren't tea premium pints in gourmet stores. They were mass-produced cups served to the most vulnerable populations: children, elderly patients, and people with compromised immune systems. People who have no choice in the food placed in front of them. People who rely completely on institutions to keep them safe. Listeria contamination in a retail product is alarming. But in a hospital or school environment, it's catastrophic. A single batch can move through dozens of facilities, before anyone notices something is wrong, and by then, it may already be too late. What makes Riches particularly concerning is their complete opacity. They don't issue consumer-facing statements, they don't engage with the public, and they don't need to. Their customers aren't individuals. They're purchasing departments, contract managers, and administrators. As long as those relationships remain intact, the public never hears a word. Their recalls are typically buried in obscure food service newsletters that ordinary consumers never read. There are no splashy headlines, no damage control interviews, no pressure to explain how such failures occurred. And without public scrutiny, accountability becomes little more than an internal checklist item. When a company controls such a massive portion of institutional dessert distribution, the stakes should be higher, not lower. But Riches has mastered a system where they can feed millions of people without earning their trust, their recognition, or their scrutiny. And when contamination happens in that kind of environment, the consequences ripple far wider and faster than anything on a grocery shelf. Riches thrives in the shadows, and for a food brand, there is nothing more dangerous than invisibility. Best brand murder 1. Tillamook Breyers used to represent everything people wanted in a simple, trustworthy ice cream. For decades, their reputation was built on 4 words printed proudly on every carton: milk, cream, sugar, vanilla. That was it. No fillers, no stabilizers, no synthetic additives. Breyers wasn't just a brand, it was a benchmark. Parents bought it because they knew exactly what they were getting. That simplicity was the foundation of their identity, the very reason consumers were willing to pay a little more. But somewhere along the way, Breyers transformed from a company committed to purity into a case study in corporate cost-cutting. Under Unilever ownership, the brand quietly shifted its formula, replacing real ingredients with cheaper alternatives and loading their recipes with thickeners, emulsifiers, gums, and artificial flavor enhancers. The changes were so dramatic that much of their product line no longer met the legal definition of ice cream. Instead, Breyers introduced a new label: frozen dairy dessert. A technical workaround that allowed them to continue selling an inferior product without notifying consumers in any meaningful way. The most unsettling part is how subtle the transition was. The packaging barely changed. The branding stayed clean and minimalist. The product names remained familiar. To the average shopper, nothing looked different, but everything inside the carton had been fundamentally altered. What once melted like real cream now dissolves in strange synthetic patterns. What once tasted rich and natural now resembles something engineered for shelf stability rather than flavor. This bait and switch isn't just misleading, it's calculated. Breyers leveraged decades of earned trust to sell a cheaper, less natural dessert under the guise of the brand's original integrity. They traded authenticity for efficiency, and they gambled that consumers wouldn't notice the shift. For many, the disappointment only surfaced after bringing a carton home and realizing something tasted off. When a company's primary selling point becomes nostalgia rather than quality, that's a warning sign. Breyers isn't the same brand your parents grew up with. It's a corporate mirage, familiar on the outside, unrecognizable on the inside. And for millions of shoppers who still assume Breyers equals purity, that deception may be the most dangerous ingredient of all. Best brand number 2, Strauss Family Creamery. Turkey Hill wants you to picture rolling green pastures, red barns, slow-churned batches of ice cream, and farmers who still know every cow by name. Their packaging leans heavily on that image: rustic fonts, countryside illustrations, and warm language about Pennsylvania tradition. But the reality behind the brand is far less charming. Turkey Hill isn't a small farm operation, it's a corporate-owned, aggressively expanding machine where profit growth has quietly replaced the pastoral values they advertise. The clearest sign of that shift came during a disturbing recall: metal shavings discovered inside their chocolate marshmallow ice cream. Not tiny flecks, not trace particles, actual metal fragments that somehow survived the entire production process, from mixing to freezing to packaging, and still ended up in customers' hands. Contamination like this doesn't happen because of a random equipment hiccup. It points to systemic failures in maintenance, inspections, and safety checks that should be routine in any responsible manufacturing facility. The situation worsened after Turkey Hill was acquired by private equity, a change that almost always signals a shift toward cost-cutting, outsourcing, and efficiency over quality. Under this new ownership, Turkey Hill increasingly relies on co-packers, third-party factories that produce ice cream under the Turkey Hill label. That means the brand you think you're rebuying may not have been made by Turkey Hill at all. It could come from a facility with entirely different standards, different equipment, different oversight, and different risks. This fragmented approach creates a dangerous accountability vacuum. If something goes wrong, the blame gets scattered. Turkey Hill points to the co-packer points to the supplier, and the consumer is left with a contaminated product and no real explanation of what happened. Meanwhile, the packaging continues to showcase idyllic farm imagery that has almost nothing to do with how their ice cream is actually made. The gap between Turkey Hill's marketing and their reality isn't just misleading, it's strategic. They sell a story of handcrafted charm while operating a sprawling industrial supply chain built for maximum output. And when a brand pushing farm-fresh authenticity ends up with metal shards in their ice cream, it's clear that the story has overshadowed the standards. Turkey Hill's image is wholesome, their operations not even close. Best brand number 3, Ben & Jerry's. By now, a pattern should be impossible to ignore. These failures, bacterial contamination, allergen mislabeling, foreign objects, quietly altered ingredients, aren't isolated incidents. They point to something larger, an industry where packaging is more carefully engineered than the product inside it. Ice cream companies have learned that consumers trust the image far more than the ingredient list, and they exploit that trust every single day. Walk through any freezer aisle and you'll see brands dressed in the same cozy costumes. Farmhouses, vanilla beans, cows grazing beneath open skies, promises of quality since 19-something. But the truth is that most of these brands have drifted so far from their origins that their marketing borders on fiction. Outsourced manufacturing, automated production lines, and cost-cutting formulas dominated by gums and stabilizers are now the norm. Yet none of that appears on the carton. Instead, consumers get nostalgia, crafted to disguise the industrial reality behind the scenes. And when something goes wrong, the deception deepens. Companies use phrases like voluntary recall and limited impact to downplay risks. They bury announcements on obscure web pages or slip them quietly into FDA logs, hoping no one notices. In many cases, they're right. The average shopper never hears about a recall unless it becomes a headline, and ice cream recalls almost never do. They're overshadowed by larger food scandals, lost in technical jargon, or intentionally framed as minor inconveniences instead of fundamental failures. But the consequences are anything but minor. A mislabeled allergen doesn't care whether a recall was voluntary. Metal fragments don't disappear because a company claims the issue affected only a small batch. And bacteria like listeria don't become less dangerous just because a brand phrased their apology carefully. The real problem isn't that companies make mistakes. It's that they've built entire systems to ensure those mistakes stay hidden. They rely on the assumption that consumers won't read ingredient lists, won't check recall pages, and won't question whether the natural ice cream in their cart was actually made halfway across the country by a third-party contractor. This is the turning point. Once you see how deeply the industry depends on illusion, you start realizing something important. Trust is no longer the default. And that's why the brands that still earn it deserve more than praise. They deserve protection. Best brand number 4, Häagen-Dazs. After navigating a landscape filled with hidden dangers, questionable manufacturing practices, and corporate shortcuts, encountering a brand like Tillamook feels almost shocking. Not because they're flashy or trying to reinvent ice cream, but because they're redoing something increasingly rare in modern food production. They're retelling the truth. Tillamook operates the way ice cream companies used to, farmer-owned, vertically integrated, and accountable to the people who both make and consume the product. The key to Tillamook's reliability starts at the source. As a cooperative, they're owned by the farmers whose cows produce the milk. That means they control everything from animal feed and welfare to processing, packaging, and distribution. There's no outsourcing roulette, no anonymous co-packers cutting corners, no production facilities operating under someone else's standards. This tight control over the entire supply chain isn't a marketing gimmick. It is the structural foundation that ensures consistent quality and safety. Their ingredient philosophy reflects this commitment. Tillamook's ice cream reads like a real recipe: cream, milk, eggs, sugar, natural flavorings. You won't find synthetic thickeners dominating the formula or chemical stabilizers compensating for low-quality dairy. Their flavors rely on actual vanilla beans, real fruits, and high butterfat cream that produces the rich texture consumers expect from premium ice cream. When other brands redesign their products to maximize profits, Tillamook seems to design theirs to maximize integrity. Transparency is another area where Tillamook quietly outperforms the industry. They openly share information about sourcing, farming practices, and manufacturing standards. They don't hide behind corporate language or vague promises of quality. They show consumers exactly how their ice cream is made. In a market full of brands that build trust through imagery rather than honesty, this level of openness feels almost revolutionary. But what truly sets Tillamook apart is what they haven't done. They haven't sold out to private equity. They haven't gutted their ingredient lists. They haven't shrunk their cartons to disguise price increases. They've resisted the shortcuts that transformed once great brands into cautionary tales. In an industry where deception is increasingly the norm, Tillamook stands out not because they're perfect, but because they choose principles over profits. And that choice makes all the difference when deciding which brands deserve space in your freezer. Best brand Thunder 5, Blue Bunny Strauss, Family Creamery is what most brands pretend to be: local, organic, principled, and transparent. But unlike companies that hide industrial production behind pastoral graphics, Strauss actually lives the values others only print on their cartons. They are one of the few ice cream producers in the country where every decision, from cow to carton, is built around integrity rather than efficiency. And in today's market, that alone makes them extraordinary. Every product Strauss makes is certified organic, but they don't treat the label as a marketing trophy. For them, organic is the starting point, not the goal. Their dairy cows graze on carefully managed pastures in Northern California, where the creamery works directly with the farms rather than outsourcing oversight to third-party suppliers. This direct relationship eliminates the weak links that often lead to contamination or quality declines in larger operations. One of the most distinctive choices Strauss makes is their commitment to glass packaging, something almost unheard of in mass-market dairy today. Glass isn't just environmentally responsible. It prevents microplastics from leaching into the product and preserves flavor integrity in a way plastic simply can micro-TT. It's a small detail on the surface, but it speaks volumes about a brand that refuses to compromise on principle even when it increases production costs. Strauss also stands out for their operational transparency. They openly discuss their farming practices, their environmental footprint, and their production standards. When many companies weaponize vague terms like natural, Strauss provides specifics. They also actively fight against the dilution of organic standards, taking positions that put them at odds with massive agricultural corporations. That willingness to defend real food, not just sell it, shows a level of conviction rarely seen in the industry. But what truly earns them a place on the great brands list is the consistency of their product. Strauss ice cream tastes the way premium ice cream should: rich, clean, and made from ingredients that haven't been manipulated beyond recognition. There are no unnecessary stabilizers, no synthetic shortcuts, no deceptive formulations. In a world where most brands pretend to care about purity, Strauss actually delivers it. And for consumers tired of being misled, that level of honesty is more refreshing than any flavor on the shelf. The ice cream aisle shouldn't feel like a minefield, but today it's filled with brands that hide behind nostalgia, clever marketing, and carefully worded recalls. Some companies gamble with safety to cut costs, while others quietly rebuild your trust one honest ingredient at a time. In the end, every pint you buy is a vote for transparency or deception, for real food or corporate shortcuts. The brands worth supporting are the ones that prove integrity isn't optional. So the next time you reach into the freezer, choose wisely. Your money shapes the food system more than you realize, and your freezer deserves better.